welcome and everyone. So we're going to have a talk with this on the webinar, and we're going to ask members of the research team and advisory group to introduce yourselves. Can we do that now?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Shall I go first and then I'll pass over to Sean and Jan. Hi, everyone. Really good to see you this morning and thanks for coming along. I'm Liz Tilley. I'm one of the researchers on this project, and I'm from the Open University. And we've been working with Learning Disability England on this project to look at the funding of self-advocacy. And I'm going to pass over now to Sean.
Hi, I'm also part of the research team. I'm Sean Pickin, an expert by experience, so I've been helping with the research team with BOU. And I'm passing it over to Jan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jan Walmsley. I was privileged to be part of this team and looking forward to telling you all about what we found out. Is that back to Gary now?
Yes, I'm Gary Borley, and I'm the membership and spokesperson lead for Learning Disability England, and I will pass over to Sam.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, I'm Sam Clark and I work with Gary at Learning Disability England. It's just to check a couple of things with you all about the housekeeping that I've got. We have turned on the automatic subtitles along the bottom of your screen. If you don't want them, you can click on the little CC button and turn them off. And as you will have heard, the American Zoom woman, as you joined, said this meeting is being recorded. We are only recording and planning to show the presentation bits. So there's some bits of this session where we'll have discussion or you'll go into breakout rooms. We weren't planning to record those, but if you don't want to be on the recording bit, then you can turn your camera off. But we will be sharing the presentation team's presentation for the people who couldn't make it. There were too many presentations there, weren't there? So I think I hand back to Gary now for him just to tell you why Learning Disability England supported this work or wanted to be a part of it. And we're really lucky that quite a few Learning Disability England members were part of the advisory group or were part of the group, and hopefully they're with us, some of them today, but we'll come to them later. So there's a slot where we're going to hear from the research team, then some of the advisory group have the chance to say what they thought, having been part of the work. Then we're going to have a break. Then there'll be a chance for people to talk in groups about what they think about it. And then we'll have a little bit of thinking about next steps. And one of our big questions for you at the end is, what more research do you think is needed, having heard this or seen the report? So hopefully I've covered everything on my list. Have I, Gary?
Yeah, I think
where
so.
we started, and then great.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about why Learning Disability England wanted to be involved in the self-advocacy research. One of our main goals is to make self-advocacy stronger, and the research helps to explain the different ways that self-advocacy can be funded. That is what we're going to do during the day, and so it's Sam to run through the agenda.
I did it in the wrong order, sorry. I think we need to hand over to the research team now, don't we?
Yeah, we need to, that's what we need to do.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Sam. Rachel, could you load the slides, please, for us? Brilliant, thank you. So just, Gary and Sam have introduced why this research matters. So this particular piece of research, I think we've been thinking about it. A few of us have been thinking about this question of funding and how groups can be supported to grow and stay strong for for quite a long time. But you may remember that we did a piece of work in the early part of the pandemic where we were looking at what self-advocacy groups were doing to fill in the gaps when the pandemic hit and how they were really stepped up to move in to support people. And we did a really interesting piece of work that highlighted the important role of self-advocacy during the pandemic. But what was coming through that research, again, was this question of funding and how groups were being funded and how they could be funded in a more sustainable way to support the excellent work they were doing and the challenges around that. And it was quite clear to us doing that piece of work in the early part of the pandemic that some groups seemed to have quite a strong funding model that meant they were quite well protected, but other groups were much more fragile. So in conjunction with Learning Disability England, we set about getting a little bit more funding through the Open University to do a specific piece of work that was looking at the different ways that self-advocacy groups were funded. So Rachel, could you move to the next slide, please? So we had 4 key questions that we wanted to explore when we were doing this particular piece of research. The first question we looked at was, why do some self-advocacy groups get funding, but others don't? So what is it that means groups in some areas have, quite successful funding models and other groups are struggling? We were interested in where the funding comes from, particularly if groups aren't funded by a local council or a local authority. So what funding sources are groups managing to attract? We were very interested to know what people who make decisions about funding, and those people are called commissioners, what do the commissioners think about self-advocacy? How do they understand it? And how do they make their decisions about whether or not to fund self-advocacy? And lastly, we were interested in the pros and cons of different types of funding. So what's good about one particular funding source? What might be a challenge? And to really talk to self-advocacy groups about their experiences of different types of funding. So they were our 4 research questions. Okay, next slide, please, Rachel. So to do the research, as Sam mentioned, we had an advisory group who were really invaluable actually to us developing this particular project. So the advisory group helped us to think about which types of self-advocacy groups we might want to speak to make sure we had a really good range. We also talked to the advisory group about the sorts of questions we might ask, and the advisory group also helped us to unpack some of the answers that we were getting both from the commissioners and the self-advocates. We then went on to speak to 8 self-advocacy groups in England, so that included self-advocate members, staff members, trustees. We also talked to 6 people who make decisions about funding, so the commissioners, and those 6 commissioners were based within 5 local authority areas, and all of the interviews that we did were conducted online. So next slide, please. Thank you. So here are the main messages from the research, and as we go through the slides, we'll obviously give you more detail about all of these things. But what we found out in this project, which completely backs up what we found out in other projects, is that self-advocacy really matters to people with learning disabilities. So it's very clear that people with learning disabilities value the role of self-advocacy and the work that self-advocacy organisations do. The commissioners that we spoke to all understand self-advocacy. They get it, they get what self-advocacy is, and they want to fund it. But we also know from our advisory group that commissioners in other areas may be less sure about self-advocacy or have less knowledge about it. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. And we also, one of our recommendations really from this research is that we think it's going to be critical for self-advocacy groups to share with each other their experiences of securing funding and sharing good practice and top tips for how to get funding and to develop relationships with funders. So I'm going to hand over now to Sean, who will pick up some of the key findings that came out of our conversations with the self-advocacy organisations. So over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Liz. Some groups, so this was messages from our self-advocacy groups. So some groups get funding from local authority or health. Some groups don't want funding from local authorities. And some groups sell services to raise money. Next slide, please, Rachel. Some funders make it difficult to get money. They ask difficult questions. They want reports with lots of words. But some funders make it much easier to get funding. They ask easy questions. They let groups send an easy read report or a video summary. Some groups told us about good experiences with charitable funders. Next slide, please, Rachel. Just making sure I don't miss a word. Funding is often short-term. What makes it difficult for groups? Funding is often short-term. Groups worry about what will happen when a place of funding comes to an end. That makes it difficult to plan. What helps groups to be successful? Having several funding sources, having staff that are good or willing writing funding applications, and using words that funders understand. Next slide, please, Rachel. So this slide was actually going to be done by a colleague, but she's really unwell, so I'm going to be taking her place to do this. So messages from commissioners. Commissioners value self-advocacy because it can help them get services right first time, help make consultation more meaningful, help with co-production, help councils to do their job properly. But funders don't have to fund self-advocacy, even though they do have to fund advocacy. Next slide, please. What groups can do to help them get more funding and grow? Our research showed that self-advocacy groups should try to reach out for more people who are further away, and people with high support needs who live further away and have high support needs. Sell services, inspections, training, producing easy read information. Build good relationships with local commissioners. Train more people so the work is shared out. Next slide, please, Rachel. What should happen next? We all need to spread the word and tell people about self-advocacy. We need to explain what self-advocacy is, why it matters, how it can help. Next slide, please. Commissioners need to invest in self-advocacy because it helps people have a good life, people to use less services, to prevent loneliness and build social connections, get services right first time, avoid the need for advocacy services, co-production and consultation. Now, I believe I hand over to Jan at this point.
Thank you very much, Sean. So we're going to finish off with the messages we've got for commissioners and others. So the tips for commissioners. Commissioners can help self-advocacy grow by obviously providing money, but some of them are struggling with that because they don't have to do it. They can also provide advice and support, and we think it's important to get that message across. It doesn't just have to be money. You can help self-advocacy groups to network. You can help them think how to market themselves more effectively. So it can go beyond money. One of our commissioners wanted to fund self-advocacy, but didn't have a group that he thought was suitable in the area that he'd moved to. He'd been used to working with one in his previous area. And we think Learning Disabilities England might have a role to play if commissioners are looking for a group to work with, but don't have one. Next slide, please, Rachel. I think there are important messages for self-advocacy groups coming out of this research. And I've all the time, very long time, I've been involved with self-advocacy. It's been a gloom and doom story often about we've never got enough funding. But some groups do have quite a lot of funding, and we need to recognise that it can be done. So I think a message is be confident in what you're trying to do. Be confident that self-advocacy matters, and it doesn't just matter to you, it matters to others. Be professional and businesslike. Don't slouch along, be on time, all those things, they do matter. Don't rely on just one funder if you can possibly avoid it. Learn what matters to funders, what words they use. You might want to use the word self-advocacy, they might want to use co-production, for example, and you need to think, how do we market ourselves in a way that people will understand? How can you help them meet the objectives they're trying to meet? Tell people about what you do. Tell people through all possible means, social media, newspapers, TV, radio, whatever you can find. Get that message out there. And if you can afford it, get professional help with fundraising, or train your staff to do better fundraising applications. Next slide, please, Rachel. And there are some tips here for funders. I think if funders seriously want groups like self-advocacy groups, they have to think about their processes. Make the application process simpler. Some groups said, with the best will in the world, we simply can't involve people in our funding applications because it would take up all our time explaining what it means. So, but some funders do make it simple. Making the reporting process simple. Don't force people to spend hours reporting when you've only given them £2,500. Make it proportionate, and allow people to send videos in or other forms of report. Don't just make it a long wordy report that probably no one will ever read anyway. Next slide, please. And so more tips for funders. Ideally, groups need funding for longer than a year. They need funding that lasts 3 years or more. So they can plan, so they can employ staff, so they can train people. And you do need to include core running costs. People cannot operate without them, and somebody's got to pay for them. And if local authorities can't pay for them, then we have to find other ways of doing that. Next slide, please. Liz, over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Jan, and thanks, Sean. So just to let people know that we've got the full report and the easy read version of that report now on the Open University website. And after this session, we'll circulate that to everybody that's been on the webinar and to our wider network. So do have a look at the reports if you haven't had a chance to look at the easy read version just yet. Yeah, and I was rereading the full report this morning, and again, I think just a key message that really sort of stood out for me, that actually both the commissioners and the self-advocacy groups were really highlighting, is local authority funding is very, very fragile at the moment. Local authorities are struggling to fund activities where they've got a legal obligation to do so. So I think it really is important that we can have a conversation about what are those other sources of funding and how can self-advocacy groups be supported to find alternative sources of funding. But yeah, that's a summary. The report's got lots more information and lots of quotes from people that we interviewed, so do take a look. I'm going to pass now back to Gary and Sam, who are just going to chair this next part of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. So